It was a Tuesday. It was supposed to be just a Tuesday. We were in the conference room on the 14th floor, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over downtown Chicago, the one that smells like recycled air and old ambition. 7 people around the table, laptops open, coffee getting cold in paper cups. The quarterly review had been going on for 45 minutes, and I had taken exactly 3 pages of notes and absorbed almost none of them. And then she laughed. Not at me. Not even near me. She laughed at something our director said. One of those dry, almost jokes that Sandra always throws in when the numbers are disappointing, the kind of thing most people politely chuckle at and move on. But Nadia laughed for real. A half-second too long. A half-second too honest. It was low, a little surprised, like even she hadn't expected to find it funny. I had heard Nadia Reyes laugh before. We had worked together for 11 days at that point. I had heard her laugh in the hallway, at her desk, in the break room when someone from sales told a story I didn't catch. I had categorized her laugh as a professional fact, the way I cataloged other facts about my new team members. Priya preferred her screen brightness at 70%. Marcus kept protein bars in his second drawer. Nadia had a laugh that... I stopped writing mid-sentence. I looked down at my notepad. I had written without realizing it. Nadia has a laugh that sounds like she doesn't let people hear it often. I crossed it out. Twice. I told myself it was nothing. It was nothing. It was a laugh in a conference room on a Tuesday in October, and I had more important things to pay attention to. But something had shifted, and the terrible, quiet truth was that I had felt it shift. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. I need to go back. Not far. But far enough that you understand why that laugh in a conference room on the 14th floor of Mercer & Cole Financial was not the beginning of anything. It was the return. Nadia Reyes and I met 9 years ago at the University of Michigan. She was a junior. I was a sophomore who had transferred in from a community college in Indiana with a chip on my shoulder and a secondhand laptop that crashed every time I opened more than 4 tabs. She was in my corporate finance lecture, the only section that fit my work schedule. And on the first day, she sat 2 rows ahead of me and to the left, close enough that I could see when she underlined things. She underlined almost everything. Not impulsively. Deliberately. She read the line, considered it, then drew the line with the pen held at a precise angle, like she was making a commitment, not just a mark. I noticed that about her before I noticed anything else. The intentionality. The way she seemed to take each thing seriously without being tense about it. She laughed easily but listened harder. She argued in class discussions with this calm kind of precision that made professors straighten in their chairs. We became study partners by accident. We were the only 2 left in the library at 11 on a Thursday when the heat went out in November. We stayed anyway, both of us too stubborn to go home. She shared her coffee. I shared my notes. By the time the building closed at midnight, we had somehow agreed to meet the following week. That following week became every week. I want to be careful here because when I tell this story, I always risk making it sound like it was always romantic. It wasn't. Not at first. Or maybe it was. A little. Always. And neither of us had the language for it yet. What I know is this. Nadia was the first person at Michigan who made me feel like I belonged there. Not because she said so. She never said anything that easy. But she argued with me like my opinion mattered. She pushed back on half my ideas and borrowed the other half. She was unimpressed by the things people usually use to sort each other into categories. What neighborhood you grew up in, what your parents did, what internship you'd landed, and deeply interested in the things most people skipped over. Why you thought something, what you were afraid of, where your instincts came from. By the end of that semester, I knew her coffee order, her study playlist, which professor made her jaw tighten, and the specific way she went quiet right before she said something that would stay with you for days. I didn't have a word for what I felt. I didn't look for one. We studied together. We got lunch on Saturdays when neither of us had shifts. We walked back from the library in the dark and talked until we reached the point where our routes split, and then kept talking for another 20 minutes anyway, because neither of us wanted to be the first to say goodnight. I told myself it was friendship, the best kind, the kind you don't plan. I told myself that for almost 2 years. And then, the spring of my junior year, her senior year, something happened. Something small. Something I have replayed so many times that I'm not sure anymore where the memory ends and the interpretation begins. We were in her apartment, the one she shared with 2 other women on Washtenaw Avenue. It was late. We'd spent the evening working on her thesis proposal and my case study for investment analysis. Around midnight, her roommates went to bed. We kept going. The apartment got quiet in that particular way it does when the city outside slows down and the only sounds left are the ones you're making. At some point, she looked up from her laptop and said, "Hey, what do you actually want? Like, in 5 years, not the resume version." Nobody had asked me that before. Not like that. Not with her eyes steady on mine. Not at midnight with the whole honest dark around us. I told her the truth. All of it. Things I hadn't said to anyone. About the transfer. About what I was trying to prove. About the specific version of a life I had been quietly building toward in my head. She listened without interrupting. And when I finished, she said, "That sounds like you." 3 words. But the way she said them, like she knew me well enough to recognize me in my own description of myself, did something to my chest that I spent the next 4 days trying to explain away. I didn't say anything. She didn't either. We went back to work. She graduated in May. She got a job in Boston. I had 1 more year in Ann Arbor. We said we'd stay in touch. We meant it. We didn't. Not because anything happened. Not because anyone said anything wrong. Just because life has a way of closing doors that were never quite opened, and we had never decided, out loud, what we were to each other. I thought about her sometimes. More than sometimes. Less than I admitted even to myself. And then 9 years passed. And then I got a new job. And on my first Monday at Mercer & Cole Financial in Chicago, I walked into the open plan office on the 14th floor, and I saw the back of a head I hadn't seen in 9 years. And I felt something in my body recognize her before my brain caught up. She turned around when Sandra introduced us. "This is Nadia. She leads our risk analytics team. She'll be one of your main collaborators on the Hargrove project." Nadia looked at me. I looked at her. There was a half-second where neither of us spoke. Not dramatic. No one else would have noticed. Just a half-second where 9 years and everything we hadn't said compressed into a space too small to hold it. "We've met," she said. Her voice was exactly the same. "We went to Michigan together," I said. Sandra smiled and moved on, and I stood there thinking, this is fine. This is a coincidence. This is a manageable situation. I was wrong on every count. Professional. That was the word I kept coming back to. I said it out loud to my reflection on the morning of my 3rd week at Mercer & Cole. Professional. You are a professional. She is a professional. There are 11 other people on this floor who are also professionals, and none of them are making you feel like this. So the variable here is not the environment. I didn't finish that thought. The Hargrove project threw us together 3 mornings a week for 2-hour working sessions in the smaller conference room at the end of the hall, the one without windows, the one that smelled like whiteboards and stale coffee, and the kind of focused work that happens when 2 people are actually trying to solve the same problem. And that was the thing. Nadia was trying to solve the same problem. She wasn't performing competence. She had it. She moved through data the way she used to move through textbooks. Systematically, without rushing, with that particular patience of someone who knows that the answer is in there and is willing to stay until they find it. Working with her was easy. That was the worst part. After years of partnerships that felt like negotiations, who was leading, Who was following? Who was getting credit? Working with Nadia felt like an actual collaboration. She pushed back. She gave credit. She said, "Your instinct on the exposure model was right, and I was wrong," with the same directness she used for everything else. She asked questions without softening them, received pushback without flinching, and laughed at the right moments, not to fill space, but because something was actually funny. I took notes in those meetings that were too careful. I reviewed them after and found evidence of my own distraction. Bullet points that trailed off, margin notes that had nothing to do with the Hargrove project, and once, unforgivably, her name written at the top of a blank page with no context whatsoever, as if my pen had escaped my supervision. I crossed that out 3 times. I told myself, "You're just adjusting. This is a new team. She is a familiar face in an unfamiliar place, and you're attaching significance to proximity. It's psychological. It's not real." I said, "We need to be professional about this." Once, out loud, when she stayed 10 minutes past the end of a session to finish explaining a point she hadn't gotten to. I said it carefully, neutrally, like I was establishing a parameter and not defending a wall. She looked at me for a moment. Just a moment. "I am being professional," she said. "I'm finishing my thought." And then she did. And it was a good thought. And I wanted to argue with her just so we'd have to keep talking. I went home that night and called my friend Celeste. Not the Mercer and Cole Celeste, my actual Celeste, the one who has known me since sophomore year at Michigan, and who has exactly 0 tolerance for self-deception in people she loves. "How's the new job?" she asked. "Fine," I said. "Good. It's good." "You sound like someone who just stepped on a Lego and is trying not to admit it hurts." "I ran into someone from college." Silence on the line. Then, "Someone who mattered?" I should have said no. I had rehearsed saying no. "We lost touch," I said instead. "That's not what I asked." I changed the subject. Celeste let me, which meant she already knew the answer. The thing about running into someone from your past is that it reactivates a version of yourself you thought you'd filed away. The self who sat in a Michigan library at midnight with no good reason to stay, who walked slowly on purpose, who felt the specific weight of being seen by someone who was paying attention. I had spent 9 years becoming a different version, more contained, more directed, better at keeping things in their correct categories. And then Nadia Reyes laughed in a conference room, and something in my chest said, "Oh, we haven't gotten to that part yet." I started noticing things I had no business noticing. The way she held her pen during meetings, the same angle as before, the same deliberateness. The way she took her coffee now, black, no sugar, always from the machine on the south side of the office, even though the north machine was newer. The way she said my name when she was handing off a section of analysis, with a slight pause before it, like she was making sure she had my attention before she spoke. I had her attention, always, when I spoke. I noticed that too. I started arriving at our sessions 5 minutes early. I told myself it was professionalism. She always arrived 4 minutes early. Neither of us commented on this. And then one Thursday, she was there when I arrived. Not in the small conference room. In the main kitchen, making coffee, facing away from the door. I stood in the doorway for probably 3 seconds too long, before she heard me and turned around. "Morning," she said. "Morning." She poured a second cup and set it on the counter beside her. Not toward me, just available, in case. I took it. We stood there for a moment, both holding our cups, not talking. The office quiet around us because we were both 15 minutes early and most of the floor hadn't arrived yet. The morning light came in from the east-facing windows and made everything look less like a workplace and more like something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet. She said, "Do you ever think about what happened? Back in college?" I should have said, "What do you mean?" I should have said, "Nothing happened." Instead, I said, Sometimes. She nodded, like I'd confirmed something. She picked up her laptop. She walked past me toward the conference room. She didn't say anything else. And I stood in that kitchen with a coffee that tasted different from my usual order, telling myself, this is manageable. You are a professional. Nothing has happened. But something already had. I just wasn't ready to let myself know it yet. October turned into November, and the Hargrove project became the thing that held our hours together. Deadlines did what nothing else had managed to. They made proximity unavoidable and excuse-proof. You can invent reasons not to stay. You cannot invent reasons to leave when there are 30 slides that need to be rebuilt by Friday morning. We stayed late on a Wednesday. By 8 o'clock, the floor was empty, except for us, and the cleaning crew moving through the far end of the office. We had takeout containers from the Thai place on Michigan Avenue between us, and the kind of silence that comes after hours of concentration. Not uncomfortable, not heavy, just present. I was reviewing the risk exposure charts when she said, I should have called. I didn't look up right away. I finished the line I was reading. Then I set my pen down. After graduation, she said. Not explaining, not apologizing, just stating. I should have too, I said. She shook her head once. No, you had one more year. I was the one leaving. I was the one who... She stopped. The silence between us had texture now. The one who what? I asked. She looked at me. Nadia has this way of looking at you when she's deciding how much to say. Not calculating exactly. More like she's measuring the words against something internal, something honest. The one who knew, she said finally. 2 words. And the whole room reorganized itself around them. I should have said, knew what? I should have said, I don't know what you mean. I said, yeah. She exhaled. A quiet sound. Almost a laugh, but smaller. And then life, I said. And then 9 years, she said. We went back to the slides. We finished the section on regulatory exposure. We split the summary pages and worked in parallel for another hour without speaking. But the space between us had changed. It was taking up more room. The following Monday, Sandra announced that the Hargrove project was moving into its final phase, and that Nadia and I would be presenting to the client board together in 3 weeks. After the meeting, Nadia walked past my desk and said very quietly without stopping, You're going to need to practice presenting with me. You hate presenting. I don't hate presenting. She kept walking. You hate presenting with other people. You'll micromanage the transitions. She was right. I absolutely would. Fine, I said to her back. Then we'll practice. We started meeting outside the formal sessions. Not by design, it just kept happening. She sent me notes late at night with questions that weren't really questions. I sent her back answers that weren't really answers. Our email threads got longer than they needed to be. Our lunch breaks, which we had never overlapped before, started overlapping. Priya from compliance noticed. She said nothing but looked at me with the expression of a person who is physically restraining herself from saying something. I noticed things that had no professional relevance whatsoever. The way Nadia rolled up her sleeves when she got deep into a problem. The way she said, actually, when she was about to agree with something she'd argued against earlier, like the concession cost her something, but she was making it anyway. The way she sometimes pressed her thumb against her lower lip when she was reading, a small, unconscious gesture that I had no business having memorized. I had it memorized. There was an afternoon, 2 weeks before the board presentation, when we were in the small conference room doing a run-through, and she stopped me mid-slide. Stop explaining, she said. I'm presenting. You're explaining. There's a difference. They already read the report. What they need is someone who stands behind the numbers, not someone who walks them through the footnotes. She tilted her head slightly. You know this. You do it in our sessions. You lose it the second you think someone might disagree. I looked at her. How do you know that? She held my gaze for a moment longer than the question required. Because I've been watching you for 11 years, she said, counting the ones in between. The words landed differently than she probably meant them to. Or maybe exactly as she meant them to. I didn't know what to do with them. So I did the thing I had been doing for 9 years. I filed them in the category of things I wasn't ready to examine, closed the folder and said, "Okay. Let's go from slide 12. She let me. But as I started again from slide 12, her voice was quieter when she gave feedback. Not warmer, exactly. Just closer to something she was usually more careful with. That night, I called Celeste again. "Have you talked to her?" Celeste asked. "We talk constantly. We work together. You know that's not what I mean. We have a board presentation in 2 weeks. Clara." Her voice was that particular combination of fond and exhausted that she only used when she'd lost patience with my talent for avoidance. "You have been rearranging deck chairs on this for 2 months. At some point the ship is going to dock. That metaphor doesn't work. You know what I mean." I did. I just wasn't ready to do anything about it. The problem was this. The last time I had let myself near the edge of what I actually felt about Nadia Reyes, I had pulled back and called it wisdom. I had been 22, and she had been graduating, and there had been 100 practical reasons why the timing was wrong and the situation was complicated, and I had used every single one of them like armor. She had left. I had stayed. And I had spent 9 years getting very good at being someone who didn't make those mistakes. Someone contained, directed, professional. The word had started to feel like a cage I'd built for myself, and then moved into so gradually I'd forgotten it was a cage at all. There was one evening, 3 days before the presentation, when she and I were the last ones left on the floor again. The city was lit up outside the windows, and we had run the deck 4 times, and it was as good as it was going to get, and neither of us had moved to leave. She was standing at the window. I was at the table, not looking at my laptop. She said, without turning around, "Why did you say we need to be professional?" I had said that 4 weeks earlier. We had never addressed it. "Because we do," I said. She turned around. "We are. We've been nothing but professional." A pause. "What are you actually afraid of?" I didn't answer. "Clara." That was the way she said my name when she wasn't letting me off the hook. I had cataloged that tone too. I had cataloged it in a file I kept pretending I hadn't made. "I'm not afraid," I said. She tilted her head slightly. The city lights behind her made everything in the room feel more exposed than usual. "Then why is your heart racing like this?" she asked. She said it quietly, not as an accusation, not as a triumph. More like she was naming something she'd been watching long enough that she could say it out loud without flinching. I looked at her. She looked back. And I said, "You can't just ask me that." "I just did." I stopped. Started again. "We have a presentation on Thursday. It's Monday. Nadia. Clara." She crossed her arms, and it wasn't defensive. It was the posture of someone who had decided to hold their ground. "I've been watching you talk yourself out of things since we were 20 years old. I watched you do it then, and I let it happen because I was scared too. I'm not interested in watching it happen again." The room was very quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat, which I was now aware she had apparently also been able to hear. "What do you want?" I asked. The same question she'd asked me 9 years ago in her apartment on Washtenaw Avenue, late at night, with the whole honest dark around us. Actually, not the professional version. She uncrossed her arms. "I want you to stop pretending you don't know," she said. "But before we continue, if you made it this far, it's because something in this story touched a nerve. That feeling of standing at the edge of something and calling it caution, when really it was fear. That gap between what we know and what we're willing to say out loud. Go ahead and hit the like button right now. It helps me keep bringing you stories like this one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and hit the bell. That way YouTube lets you know every time a new story goes up on this channel. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a room with someone and felt like the most honest thing happening wasn't in the words? It was in everything around them? Tell me about it. I read every single one. And tell me, where are you watching from? I'll heart every city. Okay, back to Clara and Nadia. The presentation happened on a Thursday. And it went well. That's the part no one tells you. That sometimes the hardest weeks of your life produce your best work, because you are operating at a level of aliveness that makes everything sharper. We walked into that boardroom, and I stood behind every number and didn't explain a single footnote, and when the chief risk officer pushed back on our exposure model, Nadia let me answer it myself, and then backed me up afterward without being asked. After, in the elevator down, she said, "That's who you are when you stop trying to protect yourself." I didn't respond. The doors opened. We walked out into the lobby. The November air hit us when we reached the revolving doors, cold and direct. She stopped on the sidewalk. I stopped next to her. "I think we need to talk," I said. "I've been saying that for 2 months." "Nadia, Clara." She turned to face me. The wind off the lake was sharp, and she pulled her coat tighter, and there was something in that gesture, so ordinary, so human, that broke something open in me. I had built a very specific story about who I was. Disciplined, clear-eyed. Someone who had learned, at great personal cost, not to reach for things that weren't clearly available. Someone who had been 22 once, and had made the mistake of staying quiet, and then spent 9 years being very proud of herself for having stayed quiet, as if the silence were wisdom and not its own kind of damage. I had told that story so many times it had started to feel like identity. And standing on that sidewalk with the wind off Lake Michigan and Nadia Reyes looking at me with 9 years of patience in her eyes, I felt the story begin to come apart at the seams. Here's what I had gotten wrong. I thought she was the one who was certain. The one who always knew. The one who had clarity and self-possession and the courage I had spent years envying from a safe distance. But she was standing in front of me, and her hands weren't quite steady inside her coat pockets. She was scared too. She had always been scared too. The difference, and this was the part I had missed for 9 years, was that she had stopped letting the fear make decisions for her. "I called this professional," I said, "because I needed a word that wasn't this." "I know," she said. "I've been doing that. Since Michigan. Every time it got close to..." I stopped. The wind pulled at my hair and I didn't fix it. "I called it something else. Something manageable. I know that too. And you..." I looked at her. "You knew, back then." She nodded. "And you left anyway." "I left because I had a job in Boston, and you had a year left, and neither of us had said anything, and I was too scared to be the first one." Her voice was steady, but only by a certain kind of effort. "I thought if I waited you'd..." She stopped. "I don't know what I thought you'd do." "I thought the same thing," I said. "About you." We stood there. The city moved around us, cabs and pedestrians, and the ordinary machinery of a Thursday afternoon in November. And none of it was touching us. "I told myself I was being professional," I said, "for 11 days. And then I heard you laugh in a conference room and I wrote something in my notepad that I had to cross out twice." She looked at me. Something in her eyes shifted, warm and a little bit undone, in the way of someone who has been waiting a long time for a specific sentence. "What did you write?" she asked. I told her. She pressed her lips together. The almost laugh again. The private one. The one that wasn't for performance. "Clara," she said, "we've been doing this for 9 years." "I know," I'm tired of doing this for 9 years. I know. The wind gusted and she was close enough that I could feel the warmth of her shoulder near mine, and neither of us stepped back. I'm scared, I said, out loud, for the first time to anyone. That's the true version. I'm not professional. I'm scared. I've been scared since I was 22 years old in Ann Arbor, and I didn't know what to call what I felt, and I didn't say anything. And then you left, and I was relieved, because at least I hadn't had to find out. She was quiet. Find out what? She asked. Whether you felt it too. She looked at me for a long moment. You already knew, she said softly. That's why it scared you. I opened my mouth, closed it. She was right. I had known. Somewhere under all the professionalism and the containment and the crossed-out notepad lines, I had known. And the knowing had been the most terrifying part. Not uncertainty, but certainty with no clear exit. I'm still scared, I said. I know, she said. So am I. The city kept moving. Somewhere a horn, somewhere the L train rumbling somewhere underground, somewhere someone else's life happening at full ordinary volume. What do we do with that? I asked. She looked at me with something that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. Something honest and a little bit hard-won. We stop pretending it isn't there, she said. Here is what I thought would happen, if I'm being honest. I thought I would be the one who needed more time, more space, more conversation. I thought I would be the one standing at the edge, asking for permission to approach it slowly. I had built that story about myself so completely that I had started to believe it was fixed, that I was the cautious one, the careful one, the one who needed to be led across the bridge. I thought Nadia was the one who had figured it all out. What actually happened was this. We went back upstairs, not to the office, to the small conference room where we had spent 3 weeks building the Hargrove deck, the one without windows, the one that smelled like focused work and honest conversations we hadn't finished yet. We sat down on the same side of the table, which we had never done before. She didn't speak right away. And that was when I saw it. The thing I had missed for 9 years, for 11 months at Michigan, for 2 months at Mercer and Cole, the thing that had been there the whole time underneath the precision and the calm and the particular steadiness she wore like a second coat. She was exhausted, not tired. Exhausted. The kind that comes from holding something for too long without being allowed to set it down. I don't actually know how to do this, she said. I looked at her. I know what I want, she went on. I've known that longer than I'm comfortable admitting, but knowing what you want isn't the same as... She stopped. Her hands were flat on the table. I've been so careful. For so long. I made this plan. Leave before anything could be complicated. Stay professional. Don't reach for something that wasn't offered. Let it be whatever it was going to be. Nadia. And then you got this job. She didn't look up, and I sat in Sandra's office when she told me who the new senior analyst was going to be, and I had to very carefully arrange my face into a professional expression. I felt something shift in my chest. When I turned around in that open plan office on your first day, she said, and saw you, I had already spent 3 days rehearsing how to act like it didn't matter. You seemed completely calm, I said. I was not completely calm. She looked up. I was extremely not calm. I was running a 5-alarm situation under a professional exterior and hoping you couldn't tell. We looked at each other. 9 years. And we had both been running the same 5-alarm situation from behind the same professional exterior. I started laughing. I couldn't help it. It came out of nowhere, from the specific place where absurdity meets relief. And once it started, I couldn't quite stop it. And then she started too. And it was the same laugh from the conference room, low, surprised, honest, and it filled the small room completely. When it quieted, she said, "We've wasted a lot of time." 9 years and 2 months, I said, to be precise. I looked at her hands, flat on the table. I looked at the specific way she was sitting, carefully, like someone trying to hold themselves together and only partially succeeding. And I realized something that overturned everything I had believed about who we were to each other. I was not the one who needed to be led across the bridge. I was the one who needed to stop waiting for her to build it first. I had spent 9 years telling myself that my caution was a flaw, that her clarity was the thing that made her stronger than me, that she had figured out something I hadn't. But she hadn't figured it out. She had just been better at carrying it. And carrying it, it turned out, was its own kind of cost. She looked steadier. She was actually more worn down. She had looked certain. She had been holding everything up with both hands so it wouldn't fall on either of us. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. Not dramatically, just there. Warm and deliberate, the way she underlined things. A commitment, not just a mark. She went completely still. I said, "I'm not interested in being professional about this anymore." She looked at my hand on hers, then at me. "No?" she said. "No." Something in her face changed. The particular kind of change that happens when someone has been holding their breath for a very long time and finally breathes out. Not collapse, not relief exactly. More like arrival. "Clara," she said. "I know we work together," I said. "I know it's complicated. I know we'll have to figure it out. I know all the reasons this is, Clara, technically complicated, and I want to be honest about that. But I also need you to know that I have crossed your name out of my notepad twice, and I think we both know what that means. And I'm done calling it something else." She turned her hand under mine. "You talk a lot when you're nervous," she said. "Yes. You've always done that." "I know." She held my hand. And we sat there in the small conference room without windows, in the building in downtown Chicago. And the ordinary evening went on around us. The hum of the elevator, the distant sound of the city, the particular quiet of a place that had been ours before we admitted it. "I'm scared," she said again. Softer now. "Me too," I said. "Good." The not quite smile again. The honest one. "Then we're starting from the same place." This was the inversion I hadn't seen coming. I thought I was the one who needed someone to show me how. I thought she was the guide and I was the one being led. I thought her steadiness meant she had arrived before me. She hadn't arrived before me. We had both been standing at the same edge for 9 years, each of us waiting for the other one to say something first. And the bravest thing either of us did, the actual brave thing, not the version that looks brave from the outside, wasn't the declaration. It wasn't the speech. It was the hand on the table. It was simple and direct, and it cost me something I had been protecting for 9 years. The comfort of never finding out. And the moment I did it, I felt the cost lift. I thought I needed her to be certain. I thought certainty was a condition for the rest of it. What I learned, sitting in that small room with her hand in mine, was that certainty was never the threshold. Honesty was, and I was finally being honest. The next morning I got to work and she was already there, coffee on the Southside machine, laptop open to a file I recognized. She handed me a cup without being asked. I took it. "We still have the Mercer Quarterly in 3 weeks," she said. "I know. And the Regulatory Review in January." "I know. This is going to be," she considered the word, "a situation." "I know that too," I said. She looked at me for a moment, and then she said, "Okay." Just that. Okay. The one-word agreement of someone who has stopped looking for a reason to wait. I went to my desk. I opened my laptop. I started my morning. And the file I had kept, the one labeled things I wasn't ready to examine, was still there. But I wasn't pretending it didn't exist anymore. The hardest thing about courage is that it doesn't feel like courage. It feels like giving something up. It feels like the floor going out, like the story you told about yourself being rewritten by someone who knows you too well to let you keep the comfortable version. It turns out, the person who finally stopped performing certainty wasn't the one I expected. It turns out that when you spend 9 years waiting for someone else to be brave first, you miss the possibility that they've been doing the exact same thing. Write discovered in the comments if you made it to the end with me. I want to know who was here for this one, and if you want to keep going, there's another story waiting for you on the screen right now. Thank you for being here. See you in the next one. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description.